Hi, I'm Karl Weber. Welcome to Video Aided Instructions English Grammar Series. This is the sentence structure program. Now we know what a sentence is, and we also know what the four basic kinds of sentences are. But let's take a step back. Remember that the topic for this program is sentence structure. Now, structure refers to the way anything is constructed or built or made. For example, a house is a structure that's made out of wood, bricks, and other materials. What is a sentence constructed from? Well, of course, the most basic unit is the word. But before we talk about individual words, we need to talk about some of the bigger parts that go to make up the structure of a sentence. In particular, there are two big parts into which most sentences can be divided. These two main parts are the subject and the predicate. Let's talk about each in a little more detail. The subject tells what the sentence is talking about. Now, the subject of a sentence may be only one word long, or it may include a number of words. In any case, the single most important word in the subject is the simple subject. The other words in the subject are there to give more information about the simple subject. And we'll see an example in a moment. The subject, then, is one part of the sentence, and the rest of the sentence, whatever is not part of the subject, is considered part of the predicate, which is the other main building block of a sentence. The predicate describes something that the subject is or does. The most important word in the predicate is called the verb. A verb is a word that expresses action or state of being. So we now have two main parts to the sentence. We have the subject, which names what the sentence is talking about, and the predicate, which tells what the subject is or does. Once again, within the predicate, there is one most important word to focus on, which is called the verb, and all the other words that are in the predicate are there to give more information about what the subject does. Let's take a look at a couple of examples of sentences and see how they can be divided into subject and predicate. Look at this example. My younger sister Ingrid once worked as a costume designer. Let's begin by looking for the subject of this sentence. Is there a word or a group of words that explains what the sentence is talking about? Yes, in this case, the first four words of the sentence make up the subject. Those four words tell us what the sentence is about. The sentence is about my younger sister Ingrid. Is there one word within that subject which is the most important word, the word that tells you specifically what the sentence is about? Yes, it's the last word, Ingrid. So Ingrid is the simple subject of this sentence. The other words in the subject are there to give more information about the simple subject. So the words my younger sister are there to give more information about Ingrid. They tell us a little bit more about who Ingrid is. Okay, if the first four words of this sentence are the subject, then the rest of the sentence must be the predicate. Remember that the predicate describes something that the subject is or does. Do the other words in this sentence describe something that Ingrid is or does? Yes, they describe something that Ingrid did at one time. Once worked as a costume designer. All of that is the predicate of the sentence. Notice how the subject and the predicate work together to express a complete thought. Either one by itself would be a sentence fragment. My younger sister Ingrid couldn't stand alone as a sentence. That's a sentence fragment. It doesn't express a complete thought. Once worked as a costume designer would also be a sentence fragment. Those words also don't express a complete thought by themselves. But when you combine the subject and the predicate, a complete thought is expressed. Now, is there one most important word in the predicate that tells exactly what Ingrid does, or in this case, did, because it's talking about something from the past? Yes, there is one word that is most important in the predicate. It's the word worked. Worked is the verb in this sentence, and it's the most important word. It tells us exactly what Ingrid did. She worked. Notice that all the other words in the predicate give us more information about what Ingrid did. The word once, for example, tells us when she did it, at one time in the past. And the words as a costume designer give us more information about exactly how she worked, what kind of job she worked at. So all the other words in the predicate are there to give us more information about what Ingrid did. But the word worked is the most important word. It's the verb. So the heart of this sentence is the subject and the predicate, and in particular, the one-word simple subject and the verb. Ingrid worked. And all the other words in the subject and the predicate are there to give us more information about how and when and at what Ingrid worked. Let's take a look at another example. She enjoys creating things with her hands. Can you identify the subject in this sentence? In this case, the subject is only one word long, she. That word all by itself tells us who or what the sentence is about. All the rest of the sentence is the predicate. It tells us what the subject is or does. The rest of the sentence, enjoys creating things with her hands, tells us something about what the subject does. The subject, she, one word long, and therefore the subject and the simple subject are exactly the same. Focusing on the predicate for a moment, is there one word there that's most important? The verb, which tells us exactly what the subject does. Yes, the verb, the most important word in the predicate, is enjoys. That tells us exactly what the subject, she, does. She enjoys. And the other words in the predicate tell us more information about what she enjoys. She enjoys creating things. And how does she create them? With her hands. So all the other words in the predicate give us more information about exactly what the subject does. But enjoys is the most important word in the predicate. It's the verb. Again, the heart of this sentence is she enjoys. And the other words, the remaining words in the predicate, are there to give more information. In this particular sentence, then, we have a very short subject, and the rest of the sentence, the predicate, tells us what the subject does. Now, occasionally, this kind of simple sentence structure gets a little more complicated with the addition of a compound subject. What is a compound subject? A compound subject is two or more things that work together as the subject. Usually, these two or more things are joined together by the word and or the word or. Look at this example. Dogs and cats sometimes enjoy living together. What's the subject of this sentence? Well, the subject of this sentence is the first three words, dogs and cats. That's what the sentence is about. All the rest is the predicate. It tells what dogs and cats do. Now, what's the simple subject of this sentence? Is it dogs? Is it cats? Well, really, it's both. The sentence isn't only about dogs, and it's not only about cats. It's about both. And since we have two subjects that are joined by the word and, we would consider this a compound subject. So the entire subject is both words and the word and between them. Dogs and cats all together go to make up the subject as well as the simple subject. In this case, a compound subject exists in this sentence. Looking for a moment at the predicate of this sentence, sometimes enjoy living together. Is there one most important word that expresses exactly what the dogs and cats do? The word is enjoy. That's the verb in this sentence, the most important word in the predicate, and it tells us what the dogs and cats do. They enjoy. And the other words in the predicate tell us more about exactly what they enjoy. They enjoy living together. And when they do it, sometimes. Just as a subject can be compound, a verb can also be compound. When a subject is compound, it means that there are two or more things that are acting together in the sentence. Can you guess what a compound verb would be? Well, that's when you have a subject which is doing two or more things. A compound verb is two or more verbs that describe what the subject does. Again, joined by the word and or or. Here's an example. The giant tree bent and swayed in the wind. What's the subject in this sentence? The answer is the giant tree. That's what the sentence is about. Is there a one-word simple subject? Yes, it's the word tree. The other words, the giant, are there to tell you more about the tree, to describe it a little bit. Now, the rest of the sentence is the predicate, bent and swayed in the wind. Now, is there a most important word in the predicate, a word that tells you exactly what the tree did? Well, the fact is there are two words that tell you two things that the tree did. It bent, but it also swayed. So those two words, bent and swayed, are both equally important. They're both verbs. They both describe actions that the tree took, and they're connected by the word and. So in this sentence, we have a compound verb. That is, two verbs joined by the word and, both of which describe what the subject is doing. So the heart of this sentence is tree, bent, and swayed. And the other words in the sentence are there to give us more information about what kind of tree it was and how and when the tree bent and swayed. So as we see, in some sentences, you may have a compound subject, that is, two or more subjects joined by the word and or. And in some sentences, you may have a compound verb, that is, two or more verbs joined by the word and or. You may even have, in certain sentences, both a compound subject and a compound verb. But most often, one or the other will be compound and not both. We've seen then that every sentence can be broken down into two main parts, the subject and the predicate. The subject expresses who or what the sentence is about, and one word from the subject, the simple subject, is the most important word in the subject. The rest of the sentence is the predicate. It tells what the subject is or does, and the most important word in the predicate is the verb. In your study guide, we have an exercise that will give you a chance to practice your understanding of these concepts. In this exercise, your job was to look at each sentence and decide which group of words was the subject and which group of words was the predicate. Then within the subject, you were to identify the most important word, which is the simple subject, and within the predicate, to identify the most important word, which would be the verb. Let's take a look at each of the sentences and see how well you did. First, 53 officers received medals at the police department awards ceremony. What's the subject of this sentence? Who or what is the sentence about? It's the first two words, 53 officers. That is who this sentence is about. And the simple subject, the most important word here, is officers. The other word, 53, gives us more information about the officers. Specifically, it tells us how many officers there were. So 53 officers is the subject, and officers is the simple subject. That means the rest of the sentence would be the predicate. Were you able to identify the single most important word, namely the verb? That's the word that expresses the action that the officers did. The answer to that is received. Received is the verb in this sentence. It tells us what the officers did. They received something. All the rest of the predicate gives us more information about what the officers did. What did they receive? Medals. Where did they receive them? At the police department awards ceremony. So all those other words in the predicate are there to give us more information about the action they did, namely the receiving. Let's take a look at the second sentence. Bored with the grown-up conversation, little Amy fell asleep under the kitchen table. Where would you divide this sentence between the subject and the predicate? In this case, the subject includes all the words up to little Amy. So the subject would include bored with the grown-up conversation, little Amy. All of that is the subject. All of that describes what the sentence is about, or in this case, who the sentence is about. What's the single most important word here? Did you identify one word as the simple subject? The answer is Amy. Amy is the simple subject. That's basically what the sentence is about. All the other words here give us more information about Amy. The other words tell us that Amy is little and that she was bored with the grown-up conversation. So all those other words give more information about the simple subject, Amy. The rest of the sentence is the predicate. Fell asleep under the kitchen table. Which word is the verb, the most important word in the predicate? The answer is fell. What did Amy do? She fell. The rest of the words in the predicate give us more information, specifically that she didn't fall off a ledge or off a sofa. She fell asleep. And where did she fall asleep? Under the kitchen table. So the subject is bored with the grown-up conversation, little Amy, and the predicate is fell asleep under the kitchen table. And fell is the most important word in the predicate, the verb. How about the next example? The number of businesses in this county has increased every year for the past decade. The subject of this sentence is the number of businesses in this county. All of those words go to explain what the sentence is about. Now, picking the simple subject in this sentence isn't so easy. It's a little bit tricky in this case. Is the sentence about businesses or this county? No, it's really about number. The word number is actually the simple subject of this sentence. One way to tell for sure is that that word, that simple subject, is the word that is most directly connected to the predicate. Let's look at the predicate. The predicate is the rest of the sentence, which says, has increased every year for the past decade. Now remember, the predicate tells us what the subject of the sentence does. Now, looking at this sentence, what has increased every year for the past decade? In other words, what does the predicate refer to? What is it that has increased every year for the past decade? Is it the county that has increased? No, the county hasn't increased. Is it businesses has increased? No, not really. What has increased is the number of businesses. In other words, the number was smaller at one time. Now the number is larger. Perhaps the number of businesses was 50. Now it's 100. The point is that the number has increased or gotten larger. So the simple subject here is the word number. It may be difficult to recognize because it's not at the end of the complete subject. It's somewhere buried in the middle, and it's easy to overlook that. But the most important word in this particular subject is the word number, and you can tell that because that's the word that's most directly connected to the predicate. Looking at the predicate, what's the most important word there, or the verb? Once again, this example is a little more tricky than some of the other examples we've seen. In this case, the verb consists of two words. Sometimes verbs in English do consist of two or even more words. In this case, the verb includes both the word has and the word increased. You need both of those words to make the complete verb to explain what the number of businesses in this county has done. The number has increased. You need both of those words to make up the verb. Notice that this is not a compound verb because these are not two separate verbs, two separate actions joined by the word and or. Instead, these are simply two words that fit together to make a single verb describing a single action, has increased. It simply happens to be a verb that is made up of two words rather than just one. So in this case, the verb is has increased. And those two words together make up the verb, which is the most important word in our predicate. Next example. According to scientists, birds and dinosaurs are biologically related. Where would we divide the subject and the predicate in this case? In this sentence, the subject is everything up through the word dinosaurs. So the subject is, according to scientists, birds and dinosaurs. The rest of the sentence is the predicate. It tells us what the subject is or does. Are biologically related. Now let's go back to the subject. What's the simple subject here? Do you notice anything unusual about it? In this case, we have a compound subject because there are two subjects, both equally important, connected by the word and. Birds and dinosaurs. So those two words together with the word and connecting them make up the simple subject in this particular sentence. Looking at the predicate, what's the most important word, the verb in this predicate? The verb is are. What the sentence is about is something that birds and dinosaurs are. And all the remaining words in the sentence give more information about that. They tell us where this information comes from, namely scientists, and they tell us what the birds and dinosaurs are. They are biologically related. Our last example, all day and all night unceasingly fell the rain. This sentence may sound a little bit unusual to you, and it's written in a slightly unusual English style. It almost sounds a little bit poetic, and we put it in for a specific reason. Where would you find the subject in this particular sentence? Well, this sentence is different from all the other sentences we've looked at so far because the subject is at the end of the sentence. In most English sentences, the subject comes at the beginning. But once in a while, you'll encounter an English sentence where the subject comes at the end, and often it has a slightly unusual sound, as this sentence does. In this case, when we ask who or what is the sentence about, we say it's about the rain. So those last two words of the sentence, the rain, are the subject. And the simple subject is the one word, rain. The rest of the sentence is the predicate. It tells what the rain did. And what did the rain do? All day and all night unceasingly fell. What's the single most important word in the predicate? The verb, which tells us exactly what the rain did. The verb is fell. So the heart of this sentence is rain fell, and all the other words give us a little more information about that. Obviously, we threw this sentence into the mix to illustrate for you that the subject isn't always at the beginning of the sentence, but in most English sentences it is. So when you're looking for the subject of a sentence, start by looking at the beginning. The chances are good that that's where it is. But if you don't find it there, stop and think, perhaps this is one of those unusual sentences where the subject appears at the end. And this is an example of that. So far in this program, we've been talking about sentences. Now I'm about to introduce a new word for a reason which will soon become apparent. This new word is clause. And here's the definition. A clause is a group of words that includes both a subject and a verb. Now you may be thinking, gee, that sounds an awful lot like a sentence, because after all the sentences we've looked at up to this point do contain both subjects and verbs. So how is a clause different from a sentence? Well, that will become obvious in a moment. Let me explain that there are two kinds of clauses. One of them is the same as a sentence, and the other is not. But it's important to understand both kinds of clauses because larger and more complicated sentence structures may involve both kinds of clauses. Here's how it works. The first kind of clause is an independent clause. An independent clause is one that can stand alone as a sentence. Why? Because it expresses a complete thought. You know the word independent means able to stand on one's own. When the United States became independent from the country that founded it, England, the United States was able to stand on its own. And an independent clause can stand on its own as a sentence. Take a look at this example. Europa is one of the moons of Jupiter. Now, this is a clause because it's a group of words that contains both a subject and a verb. Can you identify the subject and the verb in this sentence? The subject is Europa. Europa is what the sentence is about. The verb is. That is what Europa is or does in this sentence. It is something. And the rest of the words tell us what Europa is, one of the moons of Jupiter. So this is a clause because it contains both a subject and a verb. It's also a sentence because this happens to be an independent clause, a clause that is able to stand alone as a sentence because it expresses a complete thought. Well, if an independent clause can stand alone as a sentence, what do you call a clause that cannot stand alone as a sentence? The answer is a subordinate clause. The word subordinate means following, or less important than. And this describes what these clauses are like. A subordinate clause can't stand alone as a sentence because it doesn't express a complete thought. Usually, subordinate clauses begin with particular types of words which are known as subordinating conjunctions. A conjunction is a word that connects two groups of words, and the word subordinating means making something less important. So a subordinating conjunction is a word that connects the subordinate clause to the rest of the sentence and makes the subordinate clause less important. Because the subordinating conjunction is present, the subordinate clause can't stand alone as a sentence. Here are some examples of subordinating conjunctions: if, after, because, since, although, when, until. Normally, a clause that begins with one of these words, one of these subordinating conjunctions, can't stand alone as a sentence because it won't express a complete thought. Therefore, we consider it a subordinate clause. Take a look at this example. Because Europa has oceans filled with water like the earth. Now, this is a clause because it does contain a subject and a verb. The subject is Europa. The verb is has. So far, so good. But can this stand alone as a sentence? No. I think if you listen to this group of words, you can see that the clause doesn't express a complete thought. It says, because Europa has oceans filled with water like the earth. This leaves you wondering what the speaker is getting at. Because Europa has oceans filled with water, therefore what? We're waiting for some conclusion. It sounds as though the sentence is leading to some conclusion, but none is presented. And therefore, this isn't a complete sentence. Rather, it's a subordinate clause, one that cannot stand alone as a sentence. And if this were to appear in a piece of writing as if it were a complete sentence, that would be a mistake. This is really a sentence fragment. This is a subordinate clause because it begins with the subordinating conjunction because. Notice that having the subordinating conjunction because there makes this into a subordinate clause. If you were to take away that subordinating conjunction, the sentence would become an independent clause. It could stand alone as a sentence. The sentence would then say, Europa has oceans filled with water like the earth. Now that sounds like a complete thought. But when you put the subordinating conjunction because in front of it, it makes the clause less important. It makes it feel as though it needs to be attached to something else in order to express a complete thought. So this is the second type of clause. An independent clause can stand alone as a sentence. A subordinate clause cannot. And a subordinate clause usually begins with a subordinating conjunction. Thank you for watching, and good luck in your future endeavors.